Now, one thing that's important, and this goes in the next head, DTP. And here's the difference in DTP and DEP. DTP is Delayed Entry Program. DTP is Delayed Training Program. Now, the difference is DEP is for soldiers who are going to go into active duty. They have the Delayed Entry Program. If a soldier, though, is going into the reserves, either the Army National Guard or the U.S. Army Reserves, they go into the DTP, Delayed Training Program. And what happens there, at their first, and I think oftentimes that they actually go to MEPS for the first one as well with the DTP. But basically, when they sign their first contract, they have entered into the military in the reserves. And the difference is that they are supposed to go to monthly drills while they're waiting to go to basic. So here are the drills. And then there's MEPS in the second contract. Now what gets a little bit, now the thing about DTP is the regs are very similar. They say if a soldier does not show up at MEPS, they get an uncharacterized discharge. They also say that a soldier has the right to request a cancellation in their basic training date. However, the law also says that while that this basically is contradictory provisions. One, there's also laws that say that the soldier has to continue to go to drills until otherwise excused. So that's where it gets complicated. And if a soldier has entered into the National Guard, you have state and federal laws at play. In other words, you not only could be violating federal law, but state law if you don't go to drills and you don't go to MEPS. So in practical terms, what that means is, first of all, when you're talking about the DTP, and bear in mind, this term, DEP, everyone knows, it's very familiar. DTP, that term is not used a lot in the military, but that's what the regs, the terminology is, Delayed Training Program. So you may have to ask the kid, and I keep saying kid, it's probably not fair. There's a wide range of ages, but most of the folks I'm talking to are in these categories are 17, 18, 19 years old. But it's really, occasionally you can have older people too, up into the 30s. But in Delayed Training Program, a lot of times you're going to have to determine they're in it and basically ask them, okay, are you in the Guard or are you in the Reserves? So they say yes, and say, have you been to basic training? If they say no, then by definition, whether they know it or not, they're in the DTP, Delayed Training Program. So if a person enlisted in the Army Reserves or the Army National Guard and they haven't been to basic training, then by definition they are in the DTP. Once they start basic training, though, they are out of DTP. So in this status, basically, first question to ask is, Guard or Army Reserves? And the importance of that question is that determines whether you're only dealing with federal law or state law too. If the answer is Army Reserves, not Army National Guard, then this is much easier. Basically, you can tell the soldier, tell them legally you're supposed to go to drills. That's what the law says. You can't tell them break the law. But you can tell someone the consequence of not going to drills under federal is almost non-existent. In theory, they could arrest you during that weekend. In practice, they never do. And after the weekend's over, you're no longer AWOL because your drill's over. You're not absent then. And that, in theory, you're supposed to go to MEPS, but if you don't show up, the consequence of not showing up is you get an uncharacterized entry-level separation. So the consequence is you get kicked out of the Army with a great discharge. So for Army Reserves, if that's the answer, this is a very simple issue. And as an advocate, you can really handle this one on your own. Basically tell them the consequences. If they choose not to go to MEPS, you're in the gold. Now, if they say Guard, in that case, my recommendation is you need to refer them to someone with a GI rights hotline. Because the main issue there is you could have state law penalties. So if Guard, refer. And basically what you want to do is basically you need to make sure that the state that the person is in, that they are not a state that tends to prosecute people. I can tell you that Pennsylvania is crazy mad dog about going after kids in the DTP. What they'll do is if you're not there at drill, they'll send the state police to your house, pick you up, put you in handcuffs, take you to drill, and leave you there. And they'll do that every weekend between now and MEPS to make sure that you show up. and that. But from what I can tell, they haven't actually prosecuted anyone. All they do is they send the police out with a warrant, pick you up, take you to drill. I know in Indiana they prosecuted some people. Texas they prosecuted some people. I think North Carolina they have. Most states they do not. But to kind of know what the current state of it is, I recommend calling the GI hotline. Another resource though is called J.E. McNeil with the Center for Conscience and War. The Center for Conscience and War, great organization. They track the state law issues, and you can say, hey, I have a soldier who is considering not going to basic training. He's in the delayed training program, and he's in the Colorado National Guard. J.E., you probably would have a pretty good idea of whether you have anything to worry about.
That was J.E.?
J.E., And she's a really awesome attorney. She's been doing this for years and years, which her focus is on conscience injector cases. But that organization, they track the state law issues better than just about anybody else. And the problem is, too, there are some states there just aren't that many cases from, so you're kind of in the dark about. But what I'd recommend especially is learning Colorado, learning your local situation here. And as far as I know, I haven't heard of Colorado prosecuting people or going after them in state law. But in theory, at least, it's probably good to know what under the Colorado statutes. And probably Bill can help you with this. You probably, at the very least, you need to find out what this. Even if they don't prosecute people, you need to tell the person, well, under state law, in theory, you can get 30 days in jail or whatever it is. And then say, we haven't heard of them using this law, but they could. I think in the interest of fairness, informed consent, you should tell them what the law is, even if they don't enforce it. Almost every state has a penalty, and just very few of them actually enforce it.
That was J.E. McNeil?
McNeil, McNeil.